Hello, my name is Mr. Wagner, and I'm going to be your instructor for this lesson titled Elements of Culture. Now, at one point or another, you might have heard a teacher refer to this idea of school culture. Well, what does that mean? What is school culture? Well, think about at your school, the rules and regulations that are in place to control behavior or maybe monitor the dress code. How do your teachers and students and administrators interact with each other? Is your school successful at sports, or does it focus mainly on arts and music? Perhaps you attend a virtual school in which you do most of your work at home over the computer. How do you interact with your teachers then? How do you interact with fellow classmates in a virtual setting? These are all elements of school culture. Now we're going to take this example of school culture and apply it on a bigger scale. For example, the culture of a community or of a country. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this lesson. So we're going to begin section 1 of this lesson by addressing our objectives. First, we need to describe traits and elements of culture, then explain how geographers use culture to define a region, and finally, examine different types of culture found around the world. Now, in this section, we're going to focus on the first objective only, and that's to describe traits and elements of culture. So what is culture? Culture is the shared values, practices, and beliefs of a group of people. And it essentially defines the way of life for this group. It involves meeting the basic needs for the people in this group. You know, the types of clothing that they wear, how they feed themselves. Do they rely on the land, or do they hunt and gather for food? It involves the traditions and customs, the types of celebrations and religious ceremonies that are involved in that culture. And it also involves different types of organizations, perhaps political and social and economic organizations. For example, in the United States, we have a very politically active culture. That political activism is part of our American culture. So consequently, we have many organizations that can facilitate that engagement, many economic, political, and social organizations that facilitate that civic engagement for members of the American culture. Now, culture involves many elements, and we're going to talk about a few here, including language, beliefs, value systems. In some cultures, for instance, large families are highly valued, so parents are encouraged to have many children, and that's unique to certain cultures. We also have religion, roles, gender roles, the roles that men and women have in that society, in that culture. Norms, social norms, how people interact with each other, as well as technology and types of government. Now, culture is a uniting force. It unites members of a group, and it creates a basic shared understanding of the world. And it shapes interactions, it shapes interactions with the environment, first of all. Again, back to the example of food production. How is food produced in a certain culture? Is it harvested from the earth? Is it produced through agriculture? Or is it primarily produced through hunting and gathering? So that defines how, or that shapes how members of that group interact with the environment. It also culture shapes how members of a group interact with each other. For instance, in some cultures, it's unacceptable for unmarried men and women to interact with each other in a social setting. So socially, it's unacceptable for unmarried men and women to interact with each other. Now, that's a way in which culture shapes how people interact in that culture. It also shapes how people interact with people from outside the culture. How do members of a particular culture group interact with non-members of that culture? Now, culture is learned. This is very important to understand. Culture is learned directly and indirectly. Now, culture can be learned indirectly by imitation and observation. So take children, for example. Children imitate their parents and, for instance, learn the language or observe the language used by their parents and imitate that language at a very young age, in most cases before they are ever taught in school the language of that culture. And you can also learn culture directly, again, as it is taught through members of that culture, either coaches, religious leaders, members of family, and especially teachers. So culture is learned, and it can be learned indirectly and directly. So let's review this section. We introduced culture as the shared values, practices, and beliefs of a group of people. And there are many elements of culture, and to name a few, such as religion, values, technology, and language, all elements of culture. And culture is a uniting force. It unites members of a group, and it shapes their interactions with the environment, with other people in that group, as well as with people from outside of that group or outside of that culture. And culture is learned not only directly through members of family and teachers and coaches, but also indirectly through imitation and observation. So that is it for our section 1 of our lesson on the elements of culture. I thank you for your attention. I hope that you've learned something new.